Good afternoon. Chaf Beis Iyar Tafshin Pei Aleph. Going to take a look at, to begin the Rav Kook Shiur, we're going to look at a paragraph in the Shmona Kabatzim that will lead us into the next piece of the Rav Kook Orot HaTorah. The Shmona Kabatzim, as I mentioned, is the way Rav Kook originally wrote. They're now they've been printed like this, but there are actually more volumes than this. This is Rav Kook's notebooks. As he was writing, there's not necessarily a flow. He would write some thoughts. He'd get busy during the day, come back, write some more thoughts tomorrow or tonight, whatever the case is. And so they're sort of a stream of thought. And later the Nazir and the Tzvi Yehuda, Zechronim Levracha, took from the Shmona Kabatzim and set up Sfarim based on topics. So where Rav Kook wrote about studying Torah, they called it Oros HaTorah. Where he wrote about Tshuva, they called it Oros HaTshuva. But today, there's the Shmona Kabatzim are available, and you're able to just, as you like, if you want to learn the Sefer straight in order, you can go through Rav Kook's literal stream of thought as he was writing, or you can just open the Sefer and pick to a paragraph and find something that will be enlightening and elevating. This particular piece of Rav Kook was brought to my attention last week by Rabbi Dr. DePose, and he spent some time on it, and I spent some time on it, and we're going to use it as a jumping board to go back to the Oros HaTorah. Rav Kook is going to talk about Shimon bar Yochai. Shimon bar Yochai has been, obviously, when we learn Mishnah, we learn Gemarah, Shimon bar Yochai is almost always there. Certainly the last week of Shimon bar Yochai was everywhere. So let's take a look at Rav Kook. As an introduction, I believe we may have mentioned this 2 years ago, before Lag BaOmer. There's a famous stira in Reb Shimon bar Yochai. Reb Shimon bar Yochai is basically known by most people as the Tana who in Masechta Brachot Daf Lamed Hey Amud Beis basically said you have to learn day and night and you shouldn't work. Right? That's how he's quoted. The Torah says, it says in Sefer Yehoshua, "L'yamush Sefer HaTorah zeh mipicha v'agisa b'yoyim v'layla." You will study Torah day and night. Okay, now I can't work. But the Pasuk says in Kriya Shema, in the second parsha, says "Vasafta Degnicha." You go out to your field and you gather together the grain. So you've plowed, planted, cut, gathered. You're working. So how are we supposed to learn day and night? So Rabbi Yishmael answers this apparent contradiction in the Psukim and says, "Haneg bahem minig derech eretz." That's the lashon of Gemarah Brachot Lamed Hey Amud Beis. Rabbi Yishmael says when it says in Sefer Yehoshua "Vagisa bayomim v'layla," it means "Vagisa bayomim v'layla haneg bahem minig derech eretz." You still have to learn Torah day and night, but you have to have derech eretz. You have to live in the world also. The Torah is not telling you to starve to death. The Torah is telling you in the human world that you live in Vagisa bayomim v'layla haneg bahem minig derech eretz. If we have time today, we can get to the words derech eretz. Part of your handout is Rav Kook's discussion of this term derech eretz, and the famous Chazal, everybody quotes it. It's a medrash in Bereshis. Derech eretz kadma l'Torah. Derech eretz comes even before Torah. And Rav Kook will discuss that. But the words in the Gemarah in Brachos Daf Lamed Hey Amud Beis, Rabbi Yishmael says, yeah, it says in Yehoshua "Vagista b'yoyim v'layla," but the Torah says "Vasafta Degnicha." So you have to cut out time to work. So what do I do with Vagisa b'yoyim v'layla? Haneg b'min derech eretz. You have to live like a human being, and within living like a human being, there's a Hagis b'yom v'layla. Comes Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, and he says, "Efsha Adam Zareh b'shash Zariya Chayrish b'shash Ksiva Torah Matei." This is not possible answer to the Psukim. Can a person plow, plant, cut, gather? This is like a daily job to keep up with your field. It goes through every season. You have different responsibilities. You're not going to be able to learn Torah at all if you're going to be busy with your field. Torah Matei Aleh. Ella, I'll tell you what the answer to the apparent contradiction is. Yehoshua is talking about a time Yisrael oisim ritzayna shamakim. The Jewish people are absolutely shaymet Torah mitzvahs, and then they'll be able to be v'agisa v'yom v'layla. Where will they get food from? Vasafta degnicha. Goyim will come and be your servants. They will plant, and they will cut, and they will gather, and they will bring you your food. You'll be able to learn day and night. You won't have to work your field. The goyim will work it for you, and they'll bring you your food. But if you're not oyser at that's when you have to work. So there's an obvious question. Tosfos asks it there on Rav Shimon bar Yochai. V'asafta degnicha. Rav Shimon bar Yochai says that if you yourself have to work your field, it means that you're not being shaymet Torah mitzvahs properly, because otherwise the goyim would bring it to you. Okay. Now let's read the parsha. V'hoya im shamoyet Yishmael mitzvaysai asher anoichem mitzavas hamayim v'asafta degnicha. After the introduction of V'hoya im shamoyet Yishmael mitzvaysai, it says this, I'll give you your rain, it'll be on time. V'asafta degnicha. How can Rav Shimon bar Yochai say the Pasuk is talking about bisman she'ein yisrael oisim Torah shamakim? It asks the question. But that's Rav Shimon bar Yochai shita. V'asafta degnicha. If you have to work the field yourself, it's ein yisrael oisim Torah shamakim. In a very rare comment, the Gemarah says as follows: Harbe asuk Rabbi Yishmael v'olsa biyadam, harbe asuk Rav Shimon bar Yochai v'loyolsa biyadam. There's a group of people that tested, laboratory test. They tested Rabbi Yishmael shita, worked the field, and learned as well, and they were very successful. They had panasa, and they became talmidei chacham. It worked. Then there was a group of people that tried Rav Shimon bar Yochai. That's all they did was learn. They didn't work at all. Also b'yadam. It didn't work. Also b'yadam, the Torah they did, there wasn't gishmak, and obviously they had no panasa. The Gemarah in Menachot records the following incident. I forgot the name of the Amoraim. It was asked a kasha, and he said he can't answer the kasha. Why? Why can't you answer the kasha now? He said, Pasha, I don't have panasa today to buy food, and I'm worried about where my panasa is going to come from. It's not Menachos Kuf Beis Kuf Gimel. So they said, yeah, well, right? If you would be downstairs in the Beis Medrash, and someone come over to you and ask, can I ask you a question? You'd say, no, I can't learn today, because I'm worried about my mortgage. And yeah, what would the person say to you? Come on, get focused on the learning, say something to him, and you'll see the money will be there, you'll pay your mortgage. Chazal said, I can't learn today. I can't, because I have daigas panasa, and I don't know how I'm going to pay for what I need to today. And then the Gemarah brings down a Pasuk in the Teichacha in Kisavai, where we get the warnings. It says V'hoya chayecha tluyim l'cha mineged. This week we have Bahar b'chukaisai Teicha 1. Kisavai we get Teicha 2. It says in Chukaisai V'hoya chayecha tluyim l'cha mineged. Your life will be hanging by a string, so to speak. You won't have anything to hang on to. The Gemara says, what's that talking about? So the Gemara has different shitas. The Gemara says one case is someone that's totally bepaspalter. A person that only gets his bread from the neighborhood baker, he's living by the thread. He's living on he's scared. he might not be able to learn such a person if he's dependent on the baker. Why? Because one day the bakery may be closed. He doesn't have bread. The price may go up. May not be able to afford bread. So if you don't have your own bread, you don't have your own field that you can make your own bread, and you're dependent upon someone else to make you bread, you're already dependent on someone else, and already there's an anxiety there, and you may not be able to learn so good. The Pasuk in the Torah, is talking about such a person that he's dependent on someone else for bread. Not because he needs tzedakah, because he's dependent on the bakery staying open. That's already an anxiety. Okay. Rav Yochai apparently is not concerned about all this. And he says, if you show him the Torah mitzvahs properly, everything will be okay, and the goyim will bring you food. Shimon Yochai Menachot is Achlokes of Shimon Yochai and other Tanoim. Shimon Yochai makes the following statement. Rabbi Yochanan quotes of Shimon Yochai, Afilu like Kara Adam Kriyishma El Shachris for Avis Kiyim Lo Yomush HaSefer Hazeh Mipicha. The very pasuk in Masechta Brachos that Rabbi Shimon quoted from Sefer Yehoshua that you have to learn day and night and not work. Lo Yomush Sefer Hazeh Mipicha V'Gis V'Yom V'Layla. Masechta Menachot, Rabbi Shimon Yochai says, if you read Kriya Shema in the morning and you read Kriya Shema at night, you yoyt to the pasuk already. That's it. I thought you have to learn day and night. So Mefarshim already asked the stira in Rabbi Shimon Yochai, do you have to learn day and night? Is Kriya Shema enough a day if in the morning and night? We know there's another event Rabbi Shimon Yochai recorded in Shas. Gemarah and Shabbos. He's running away from the Romans. He's in the cave for 12 years. He's learning la'ela with his son Rabbi la'ela. After 12 years, they hear Eliyahu Hanavi at the opening to the cave. Eliyahu Hanavi says, who's going to tell Yochai that it's okay to come out? So he comes out, and they start looking around. Rabbi and Rabbi Shimon, they see Jews are working fields. What does Rabbi Shimon hold about Jews working fields? It must be not Shem Torah mitzvahs. So Rav Shimon Yochai, because of, or Chaim talks about it, whatever the power is in his eyes, he looks at the fields and he's so shocked that Jews can be working and not learning. The fields burn down. He creates a fire with his eyes. The fields are burning down. A baskol comes out from heaven and says, Lachoy alami yitzosim. You left the cave to destroy my world? Go back into your cave. Rav Shimon Yochai says, okay, I have to go back into the cave. How long should I stay in the cave? It's a shayla. How much longer should I stay? Another 12 years? What should I do? Rav Shimon Yochai says to his son, we learned in Masechta Edios that Mishpat Rishoyim beGehenim Yud Beis Chodesh. A Rasha has to go to Gehenim for 12 months. So we're going to go back into the cave for 12 months. That's a pretty damning self-awareness. I'm going back into the cave for 12 months because a Russian needs to go to Gehenna for 12 months. That's what Gemarah says. What did Rabbi Shimon Yochai suddenly realize? There's a transformation of Shimon Yochai. The possible stira between what he says in Brachos and what he says in Menachos most probably had the intervening 12 years in between. So Rabbi Shimon Yochai pre-cave is saying, nobody work, everybody work your field, nobody work a field, everybody learn. He comes out of his cave, and it's 12 years after he's learning day and night with Rabbi Loza, and he gets Kol Sisrei Torah to Zaya, and he comes out and he's burning up the world because he can't tolerate people who are working. Rabbi Shalom says, go back in your cave. Rabbi Shimon Yochai paskins on himself, I'm a Rasha. I need to go back to Gehenna to the cave for 12 months. He comes out of the cave, and he's a transformed person. Comes out of a cave, and it's an Erev Shabbos, and he sees a Yid running before Shkia with two Hadassim. If you ever see outside Sephardi shuls, they have Gaboyim holding all kinds of things to make a Bori Atzei Psamim or Bori Mine Psamim. Rav Shimon Yochai says to him, what are you doing? I'm taking it L'Kavod Shabbos. He says, you only need one. Why are you running around with two? He says, no, one's l'kavod zachar and one's l'kavod shamor. This is one of the reasons that women light a minimum of 2 candles, one keneged zachar, one keneged shamor. Now, Shimon bar Yochai turns to his son and says, look at this, unbelievable. Can you imagine Jews? What a holy people. He's running home with 2 bunches of hadassim, one keneged zachar, one keneged shamor. Is this the same of Shimon bar Yochai pre-cave? Okay, so he's running home with 2 hadassim. How many hours a day do you learn? This is pre-cave and post-cave of Shimon bar Yochai. And he was transformed by a musa shmuz from the Rabbi Shalom. Lachar v'saylam yitzasem. You left your cave to destroy my world? I want people working the fields. Don't burn up these fields. I want people working the fields. Okay. Comes up Shimon bar Yochai and says, you know what? If a person reads Kriya Shema in the morning, reads Kriya Shema at night, and he's an Oved Hashem, and he's working his field during the day, he's Makayim that Pasuk Lo Yomush that I once said is only if you're learning 24/7. With that introduction to the life, so to speak, of Shimon bar Yochai and his what seems to be a changed perspective, did Reb Shimon bar Yochai make a mistake? Nobody has to say anyone made a mistake. Things happen in the world, and things happen to people, and people are reading God's signs, and God is always talking to us, and He's giving us messages that we need to know for our life as it is now. What may have been good and true for us 20 years ago, or may have been good and true for Klal Yisrael 500 years ago, the world moves, the world changes. Not that Torah ever changes, but the perspectives of what you need to do change. Reb Shimon bar Yochai, you have to learn 24/7, and then Reb Shimon bar Yochai, you can read Kriya Shema morning and night. He didn't become an apikairis later in life, and he said you only have to read Kriya Shema. He saw a new mitzvahs, and he had a new perspective, and it wasn't, I changed my mind. Change your mind. This is what it was. I heard God talking to me, and this is the way it'll be now. With that introduction, let's take a look at Rav Kook in the Shmona Kabatzim Shin Samach Vav. Ha'iskabrus haruchnis ha'elyona. When a person becomes more and more strengthened with greater ruchnius, the ruchnis ha'elyona. We'll call it a ruchnius. So what would you say now? What's the common folk sense today? The more you become elevated in Torah and Avodah and Shmiras Mitzvahs, the more you become separated from this world. You become separated. The more you're separated, the more you're connected to the world, the lower madrega you are. The higher the madrega, the less connected you are to this world. Rav Kook is going to say just the opposite. Rav Kook doesn't quote the Medrash, but we're coming to Shavuos. The Medrash says one of the things that are unbelievable that happened at Har Sinai, at Matan Torah, is that Moshe went up the mountain representing Klal Yisrael, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shechina came down to the mountain, and Elyonim met Tachtoinim, and Tachtoinim met Elyonim. The human beings went up, and the Rebbeinu Shalom came down, and now there was a union from above and below, and that's Matan Torah. To lift yourself up and to bring things down. To bring the Kedusha down to a level that a human being can be a Kaddish. So hiskabras haruchnis ha'elyoina, the more a person becomes strengthened in his ruchnius, machazekes es hatochnim hamaasim, the more he wants to be, quote unquote, involved in daily life. Umagberes es his anyonut im ha'olam v'hachayim v'chal hashabam. And it creates a desire, a strong desire in a person to be more involved in the world. Magaberes es his anyonus im ha'olam. A person's more interested, ma'unyan. He becomes more interested in what's happening in the world. v'hachayim, and life, v'chol hashabam, everything that's going on. And that's a healthy thing. You know when we became disinterested in the world and disinterested in what's going on around us? That was a result of the churban Beis HaMikdash. That's one of the results of churban Beis HaMikdash. We became completely disinterested in the world. Rak bisman hachurban v'karav lo. Only at the time of the churban and around that time thereafter, shehachel hayisraeli netak me admaso, that Jewish people were exiled from the land. Let's stop here for a moment. What does that mean? That dirty word, today's dirty word, nationalism. When people lived in Eretz Yisrael and were connected to the land, for a kedusha of the land, for the truma, the shemitah, the payah of the land, they were connected to the land, and they wanted to be a nation that lives in the land. A nation that lives in the land needs a king. It needs a Beis HaMikdash. It needs all kinds of things. The Chafetz Chaim made a cheshbon of how many mitzvahs you can still do today. Of the 613 mitzvahs, he made a cheshbon how many mitzvahs you can do. There's not many. But in order to do all 613 mitzvahs, you have to have all sorts of conditions. Some of the 613 mitzvahs are only for a king. Some of the 613 mitzvahs are only during the time of war. Some of the 613 mitzvahs are for a Navi. Some of the 613 mitzvahs are for a Kohen. Some of the 613 mitzvahs are for a Levi. In order to live in a period of time where Klal Yisrael can watch the performance of 613 mitzvahs, you need a king, you need a Beis HaMikdash, you need Kahanim, you need Leviim, you need etc. Otherwise you can't witness 613 mitzvahs. So while the Jewish people were living in Eretz Yisrael, and there was a king, and there was a Beis HaMikdash, you were living the possibility of the performance of 613 mitzvahs. And because you're living in your land needs to be protected from invaders, all the things that you need to do to live in your land. And so there was a natural interest of the Jewish people to make sure that they were safe in their land, make sure they had an army, make sure the Melech was doing his job. All these things, what we call today political, is part and parcel of being able to live in a country. You cannot take Eretz Yisrael, cut it out, and take it to Mars. They haven't figured out how to do that yet. But you can't pull you can't pull a country off the earth and plant it on Mars. Eretz Yisrael is part of this earth. Part of this earth means that it has borders, and borders means that there are people that like you and people that are enemies. You have to deal with these things. But as soon as we left Eretz Yisrael, and there's a churban, there's no borders. There's German Jews, they have to get used to living in Germany. The Polish Jews have to get used to living in Poland. Hungarian Jews get used to living in Hungary. American Jews get used to living in Hungary. I have no hit on you. I have no interest in really what's going on. That's all I need to make sure is that there's no gzeres hashmada in Hungary. I have to make sure there's no gzeres hashmada in Poland. This is what the Chalvan in the Sefer calls the Golos mentality of doing nothing else except trying to survive. I'm not trying to actually grow. I'm just trying to survive. I want to make sure the Cossack doesn't kill me. Okay? That's a Golos mentality. I'm not in a position to build anything for the future because I'm just trying to save myself. So once there was the churban Beis HaMikdash, v'netak me'ad Mosai, v'hutzrach lahakil estu dasai oz b'mamadei haruchni hamufshat, and now mufshat means sort of separated and disconnected. Now the Jewish people in exile have to see and develop their ruchni is completely detached from quote unquote a homeland. Hishrish Rab Shimon ben Yochai yistarka leprish mechayei shor b'shvil chayelam. In that kind of situation, Rab Shimon ben Yochai is a Talmud of Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva lived shortly after the churban. So this is the time period. Rab Shimon ben Yochai at this time period, Rav Kook says, the churban is first taking hold in Klal Yisrael. It just happened a little while back. Rabbi Akiva is living in a time of Bar Kochva. He thinks Bar Kochva is Mashiach and Bar Kochva is going to defeat the Romans. So We're living like in those first years of churban, and the churban's taking hold. Rav Shimon says, in this kind of atmosphere where we're no longer in our homeland, and we have no nationalistic ambitions, the only thing that we can do is we have to learn 24/7. We don't have to be involved in the world at all. The times have changed. And when Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai developed the shita, that in a time of a churban where we're disconnected from our land, our ambitions change. Now our ambitions are not to make sure we maintain a healthy, strong country. Our ambitions now are that we should maintain only a healthy and strong koilel. When he developed the shita, we just mentioned the Gemarah in Shabbos, the Rebbe Shalom came down to him and said, you just left your 12-year cave koilel. You just left the 12-year cave koilel. And now you want to burn up my world? Go back into the cave. I don't want you. Rav Shimon hears the Muslim who says, wow, mishpat rishoyim begehenim yud beis chodesh. I got to go back in for 12 months. I'm a Rasha. That can change your perspective when God talks to you that way. So even b'shas churban, where someone can say, maybe we have no nationalistic ambitions today, there is no country, we just got exiled, we have to turn our attention, our focus, to what people love to quote. We say in Slichus, Ve'ein lanu shir rak ha'Torah azos. There's nothing left over for the Jewish people except Torah. And we'll deal with that maybe next week. So even where Shimon bar Yochai developed the shita, as the churban was taking hold, Rabbi Shalom said, no, this is not what I want. There are people need to work their field, they need to be interested in the events going around in the world, and you need to live in Metzias and reality. Aval, however, and certainly, kasher higia haTorah shel binyan ha'umah ba'arza, when the Rebbe Shalom sends us signals that it's time to rebuild the country and for Jews to return, what does that mean? That means it's time for us to change our perspective. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai changed his perspective. He said, you say Krishna morning and night. It's okay to change your perspective. Why? Because God's talking to us and as history changes, we change our perspective as God is changing history in front of your eyes. You say, no, I'm not going with that. I'm not going with that. I'm going to live the same way I lived 500 years ago. I understand. Shabbos is Shabbos, and tefillin is exactly the same tefillin as Moshe Sinai. But something happened. Something happened. There's a perspective that needs to change about what your ambitions are going to be. And a time comes, Rav Kook writes, so he's writing obviously before the Medina. He died before the Medina was ever established. He's saying, but when the time comes that the Jewish people have the opportunity to build a country again, now how are you going to build a country again? All right, everybody listen. I want everybody to say Tehillim and add an extra hour of learning to your day. And within the next year, I'm maftiach you that there's going to be a healthy country here with an army to protect it and a government, and there'll be kings again, and there'll be Nevi'im again. I'm telling you, these are the kapitel of Tehillim. We're going to split up Tehillim amongst everybody, and we have to do it for a year, and everybody has to add an hour learning, and you're going to see all of a sudden everything's going to be okay. It doesn't work that way. And it hasn't worked that way. Now when this change occurs historically, that means that the Rebbe Shalom is saying, take your hands out of your pocket, put your hand on the steering wheel, and start driving. I've given you the car, I've given you the keys. Turn the engine on, put your foot on the gas, and move. We're ready to build. And somebody will say, the car was given to me by an apikairos. I'm not driving the car. I'm not driving the car. Sold the car for Brentverin. Let the car burn. The car was gifted to me by an apikairos. I don't believe anybody would say, apikairos comes over to me and says, I like you, you're a nice person. I like you. Why don't you take this brand new Lexus Take it. It's my gift. Yeah, I'm writing it over to you. You're a nice person. You're my neighbor. Here's my Here's our Lexus. No. You don't take gifts from a kaifa b'tayva. I'm going to burn the car. Michigan. The Baruch Shalom opens up a pathway and gives a gift and says, here's a car. But I'm giving you the car through certain people. Now get in the car, after they gave you the car, get in the car, turn on the engine, put your foot in the gas, and build. I'm not going into such a car. I'm not going into a car like that was given me by a kaifa. Rav Waldenberg, the Tzitz Eliezer, at least 17 volumes of Tshuvas. He was nifta maybe 20, 30 years ago. He was the Rav HaPoisik of Bika Cholam Hospital. He was a bucky in medical shilas. He was the Rav HaPoisik of Bika Cholam Hospital. He was a really, really old timer. I had the chance to see him 2 times and to talk with him. He lived in Yerushalayim, and I went there with my wife. So we came into his dining room, and there was you can barely see him, except for the fact that his face was shined like a sun. Otherwise you couldn't see him because he only had one bulb in the ceiling. There's not a fixture in the house. It was just a bulb hanging down from a wire. His table was what you would call a ping pong tabletop on horses. And all around the table were this chair and this chair. He picked up chairs. Probably, people threw out chairs. He put them around his table. So that was his dining room set. Happy? You can't imagine this person's simcha. He had nothing. The person's simcha it was written on his face. I have everything I want. He wrote 17 volumes of tshuvas. In the middle of a tshuva, whatever he's talking about, he dresses Medinas Yisrael. Addressing Medinas Yisrael, he says, look, there's you can say this, you can say that, there are all kinds of discussions. But one thing I want to make clear, that this taina, that the Medina came about through kaifrim or machale Shabbos, is itself a taina of kfir. That has nothing to do with the halachic discussion about the Medina. And I've mentioned this to Tzitz Eliezer many times. I think we mentioned last week, 2 weeks ago. Who built the second Beis HaMikdash? Read Ezra and Nehemiah. The Geschmacke Talmidei Chachamim stayed in Bavel. They would not go back to Eretz Yisrael. Who came back? Intermarried men. And not only they came back to Eretz Yisrael, they came back with their shikses. And they built the second Beis HaMikdash. And there was a whole thing at the Shar Hamayim on Rosh Hashanah. Ezra and Nehemiah get up and they start reading from a Sefer Torah, and everybody starts crying. Why? Because they heard and they start taking out whatever they take out. They say, oh, today is Echad L'Chodesh Hashvi. Oh, today's Rosh Hashanah. Oh, they didn't even know it was Rosh Hashanah when they came to hear the speech. And they start crying when they realize the extent to which they've fallen. So Ezra and Nehemiah say to them the famous Pasuk, everybody go home, eat, it's Yontif, enjoy Yontif. After Sukkot, we're going to take care of these problems. And after Sukkot, they met again, they took care of the shikses. That's who built second Beis HaMikdash. Second Beis HaMikdash lasted for 420 years. It wasn't the most golden Beis HaMikdash, it was missing some things, and there was a lot of problems in the second Beis HaMikdash, but the second Beis HaMikdash. People brought karbanos there. Second Beis HaMikdash in which Hillel HaZaken walked. The second Beis HaMikdash in which Hillel HaZaken brought his karbanos. Was the second Beis Hillel didn't say, or Shammai, I'm going to bring a korban, a Beis HaMikdash that was built by guys who were married to shikses? Burn the thing down. I don't have anything to do with this. Nobody had such a shita. Rav Waldenberg says, what's your business? Who God decides will be his shliach on planet Earth to do something. They do it, then you walk in, and you do, and you make it what you think it should be. You don't burn it down. They're God's messengers to build something. Go in there and do something with it. Okay. So there comes a point in time, Rav Kook says, I quote these other things because people like to talk about Rav Kook as some kind of Zionist revolutionary. His ideas were never spoken about before. They were spoken about before. He actually put them down on paper in a historical perspective, given the 1920s and the 1930s and the Balfour Declaration and what was happening in the world. So when such a thing opens itself up and it's time to build a country and time to build a nationality, a nationalism again, this is an opportunity from the Rabbi Shalom, and in order to have that, you got to get your hands out of your pocket, put your hands on the steering wheel, create laws for such a country, create the Torah culture of such a country. Hareheim gufei Torah. Doing this becomes the actual guf haTorah. It becomes the skeleton upon which you can build Torah. Now let's think about what Rav Kook spoke about the last couple of weeks about Torah in Eretz Yisrael. Talked about it at great length. The Rebbe Shalom created a tev in the whole world. There are places that grow good oranges. There are places that grow sour oranges. There are places that grow eating oranges. There are places that grow oranges that you can squeeze for geschmacka juice. There are places that grow kiwis. There are places that don't grow kiwis. There are places that grow onions. Places that don't grow onions. There are places that grow dragon fruit. I never saw dragon fruit till I came to Eretz Yisrael for Shech Yon Rosh Hashanah. I never even saw such a beautiful thing. There are places that grow dragon fruit, places that don't grow dragon fruit. The Rebbe Shalom created such a tev in the world. Now, if the Rebbe Shalom created a tev in the world, the Rebbe Shalom can say, the Amoraim, the Tanoim, Amoraim can recognize that Avir Eretz Somakim. There's a teva that the air in Eretz Yisrael is different than the air in the physical world. Is the air in London different than the air in Eretz Yisrael? Yeah. There's all kinds of pollutions, there's all kinds of... Air is different. Everywhere the air is different. There's a spiritual difference also. Avir Eretz Somakim. So by a person understanding that the country needs to be built, and there's a קיבוץ גליות, and in order for there to be a קיבוץ גליות, you have to have a country. You have to have a government. You like the government, you don't like the government. I guarantee you, in the history of the Jewish people, there was only one government that people ever liked, and that was Shlomo HaMelech. The 40 years of Shlomo HaMelech was Ishtachas Te'enai, Ishtachas Gafnai. Everybody lived a nice life. There was plenty of panosif. Everybody, the Queen of Sheba, came here to see how all this can be done. But other than those 40 years, there was always machlekes. As soon as Shlomo dies, his son Rechavam, and then you have Yerovam, northern kingdom, the southern kingdom, the two rifts never healed. Yeah, we're coming to Matan Torah. Vayichan Sham Yisrael Keneged Hahar. The Jewish people surrounded Har Sinai, and it says it in singular, Vayichan instead of Vayachnu. So Rash says the famous Ke'ish Echad B'Leiv Echad, united like one person. We love to quote that Rashi. Ke'ish Echad B'Leiv Echad. What's the rest of the Rashi? But from there forward, after Har Sinai, wherever the Jews went, they were fighting with each other. That's the rest of the Rashi. That's why it says, Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Hahar. When the Jews accepted the Torah, it was one person, united. But that was it. After that, they're fighting everywhere they go. They're fighting with themselves, they're fighting with Moshe. There's always fights. Never. So if you want to create a place that Jews can come back together as a united people, what's going to unite them? The same machlekes that they had in Europe for the last 2,000 years? We're going to bring all the machlekes that we had in Europe, and now let's plant in Eretz Yisrael so we can have the same machlekes that we have for 2,000 years, and Baruch Hashem we can have now in Eretz Yisrael. We're trying to do here is bring a nation back to that madrega of Ish Echad B'Leiv Echad. We want to come back to the basics of being a nation. You want to be a nation, you have to build. You want to build, you have to have certain laws. You want to have certain laws, you have to have a government. You want to have a nation that has protected boundaries, you have to have an army. Okay. Rav Kook's point here is that the more a person becomes mischazik in his kedusha, in his ruchnius, the more he wants to be involved in the daily routines of life. If a person separates himself from the daily routines of life, then he has something, but he doesn't have Tovas Moshe. What is Tovas Moshe? Moshe Rabbeinu went up to heaven, And the Malachim said, Rebbeinu Shalom, do not give him the Torah. He's a human being. They have a Yetzer Hara. They're going to do Averis. So Rebbeinu Shalom said to Moshe Rabbeinu, I'm leaving it up to you. This is a debate between you and the Malachim. You debate them. They say I shouldn't give it to you. You debate them. What does Moshe Rabbeinu say to them? It says, Anochi Hashem Alekecha. You have a Yetzer Hara to want to bow down to a statue. You have parents. You like to steal things up here. What do you want the Torah for? What is it going to do for you? Because man has a Yetzer Hara, and because man lives on earth, that's why the Torah was given to us. The Torah is a medium through which a person, a community, a nation, a world grows. It's not there to learn. I understand you malachim in heaven can learn on a much higher madrega than me, but what are you going to do with your learning? How is it going to make you holier? It can only make a human being on planet Earth holy. As he works his field, we can do it with Truma, Meiser, and Peya, and Shemitah. As he's eating, he can make a bracha and bench. Do people eat up here? So if the Rebbeinu Shalom just wanted the Einstein lahavdils, the Einsteins of learning, I want to have the greatest minds learning Torah, the Torah would have stayed up there. The Malachim can learn better than we can. The Rebbeinu Shalom didn't intend it that way. He wrote a Torah so that it can be used to elevate the person up Har Sinai like Moshe, and then the Rebbeinu Shalom can come down and greet him at Har Sinai as HaKadosh Baruch Hu did at Mount Torah. So this is Rav Kook's perspective. The Rav Shimon bar Yochai that we talked about, pre-cave, post-cave, and even Rav Shimon bar Yochai's idea, post-churban, was also criticized by Rebbeinu Shalom. But this was sort of a goalless mentality. I don't have a country anymore. I don't have borders. There's no nationality here anymore. And the thing I only have to worry about is Ein Shiur Rak Torah. I just have to make sure that we learn Torah. And if you learn Torah, everything's going to be okay. Okay. The second page, the first page you handout was the Shmona Kabatzim that we just read. The second page of your handout has a base on it. Is that what's at the top of the page? Base? Hey. Okay. If you go to the next page, it should say at the top of the page, 452. This is Rav Kook quotes a Pasuk, and because Rav Dro reprinted this Oret HaTorah, it was in print before Rav Dro, but he took it and he wrote an explanation, also quoted the sources that Rav Kook quotes. Rav Kook learned in Volozhin. At the time Rav Kook learned in Volozhin in the 1850s, 1860s, no, I'm sorry, Rav Kook was born in 1865. So Rav Kook is learning in Volozhin maybe in the 1880. Young man, he's 15, 16, learning in Volozhin. That's the time about when Reb Chaim Brisker and the Netziv are dual Rosh Yeshivas. That's a tough thing, but they do Rosh Hashanah. Eventually, Reb Chaim Brisker leaves Volozhin. It doesn't work out, and the Netziv becomes the Rosh Hashiva of Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin. Netziv becomes Rosh Hashiva of Volozhin, and Rav Kook becomes very, very close to the Netziv. Very close to the Netziv. We know that the Netziv was a tremendous Oyev Eretz Yisrael and was very much on board with this whole idea of Kibbutz Goliath and going back to Eretz Yisrael, etc., etc. In Parshas Ha'azinu, so now we're going to read a piece in the few minutes remaining as Hakdama to next week. I'm going to read a piece that of the Netziv. So it's not Rav Kook talking, okay? This is not the Rav Kook Zionist revolutionary, Chas v'shalom. say that sarcastically. Don't read a piece of Netziv. And Rav Kook is learning in Volozhin, he hears this from the Netziv. This is on a Pasuk, and it's printed in the Hemek Dover, the Netziv's Hemek Dover. He printed a Pirush on Torah. And in Parshas Hazinu, there's a Pasuk that says, Hal Hashem tigmalu zois. How can you treat God this way? Am navol v'loy chacham. A disgraced, a disgusting people who have no knowledge. The Pasuk. Moshe Rabbeinu's the Hazinu Musa Shmuz. Hal Hashem tigmalu zois. How do you treat God this way? Am novel, a disgusting people. I'm a novel, v'loy chacham, and no knowledge. The Ramban ala Torah says the word novel comes from the word novlot. Novlot is a Hebrew word for fruits that fall off a tree before they're ripe. And the Ramban explains the pasuk that way. Am novel v'loy chacham, and he has a whole explanation to what a novel is, but it means a person that's not completely ripe. He's not completely cooked. Yeah, it's a pot. In order to make a good vegetable soup, you put all the vegetables in with all the good spices, with the water, you turned up the heat, it's not fully cooked yet, svelte, and you can taste it. Everything's in there, but you can taste something's off. Am novel it's a fruit that fell off the tree. It's not completely ripe, and you can taste not fully ripe. Something's not finished with these people. Okay. So the Netziv says as follows: Hemek Dover. This comes from the Hemek Dover in Parshas Hazinu. Just hold on to your seats, okay? It's not me saying this. It's Netziv writing this. Hal Hashem tigmalu zois. The first part of the pasuk says, how can you treat God this way? How can you do this? Omer al churban bias rishon. Moshe Rabbeinu was talking about the first churban. During the first churban, the Gemarah in Yuma tells us there was nechra because of avodah zara, gilya rayesh, vichastam, the worst averes, the averes that Yehoshua val yavo, the Jews were doing them. So Moshe Rabbeinu says in the Musa Shmuz, Hal Hashem tigmalu zois. This is how you treat God after everything He did for you? Avodah zara, gilya rayesh, vichastam. How is it possible you can do this to anger God this way? And then Moshe Rabbeinu turns his attention prophetically to the churban of the second Beis HaMikdash. He says the second word, the second phrase of the pasuk, Am novel, an unripened or a disgusting people, v'loy chacham, and they're not wise. Eini yachol et moya aleim hal Hashem tigmalu zois. The first Beis HaMikdash, Moshe Rabbeinu says, how can you treat God this way with such terrible averis? When he sees the second Beis HaMikdash Charav, he doesn't say, Hal Hashem tigmalu zois, how can you treat God this way? Shrei mechuvanim l'shem shamayim. The Gemarah Yuma says that in the second Beis HaMikdash, everybody was learning Torah. And they were mechaven l'shem shamayim. Everything was l'shem shamayim. These are words of the Netziv. Aval hapela sha'atem am novel. But Moshe Rabbeinu was shocked that you can be learning so much and still be not ripe. The Torah hasn't fully cooked you. You're immature in your Torah growth. With all the learning, you're an immature Torah person. Ketargum Unkelis, the Targum Unkelis himself. Unkelis is a Tana. The Unkelis himself says, on the words, Am navol v'loy chacham, the kabilu ayraisa, you're a people that accepted the Torah, you learned Torah, hainu shalameidim v'yagayim b'ter machsheres v'yitzadik v'yasha. They're learning a lot of Torah, and all this Torah should prepare them to be big tzaddikim and big yesharim. V'novel hu miloshim medrash bereishis Rabbi, and the word novel comes from the words in medrash bereishis Rabbi. Noivus chachma shalmayla Torah. We don't have to go into the medrash, just think about what I said about the Ramban. It's not full, it's not complete, it's unripened. Kach huva b'shem hagrazal. Netziv quotes the Gra. Of course, in Volozhin they have a Messiah on everything the Gra learned. Volozhin was opened by Reb Chaim Volozhin. Reb Chaim Volozhin, Talmud Muvig of the Gra. So in Volozhin they had tremendous Kabbalahs on Divrei Gra. V'loy chacham, and you're not wise people. This is talking about the churban bayasheni. V'lo chakimun liyos nisharim me'anhagara. You didn't get smart enough to stay away from bad hanhagas, from bad conduct. Ukvan isbayr le'el dalad yudalad. And I've already explained, the Netziv said earlier in Dvarim, perek dalad pasuk yudal, it's a whole Netziv in itself. Shechurban ba yesheni bahakilkel al yedei gedolei Torah. So when you want to read such a Netziv, you go, oh my God. And I've already explained to you earlier in Dvarim that the churban ba yesheni came because of the kilkel, the ruination brought about by the gedolei Torah. It's a good thing that Netziv not living today, and it's only printed in the Sefer, because if the Sefer was going to be printed today, it would be put in the chaylim. We all know that. If the Netziv wasn't the Netziv of Volozhin from the 1860s, 1870s, and he was writing this today, the Sefer would be banned in bookstores. So Rav Kook is going to deal with this piece of Netziv. And what he's going to develop, we'll see him here to Hashem next week, is this whole idea of Torah that doesn't fully develop. You learn. When I was learning this Rav Kook a long time ago, several years ago with someone, he said to me, there are like people who take their written driving test, and they study for it, and they get it right. They take their eye exam, and then they start taking driving lessons. And then time goes by, and by law your written exam expires. You have to take it again. They take it again. And the eye exam expired. They take it again. And here and there, it's also there's laws about you have to start taking, if you took your driving lesson 6 years ago, you have to take them again. You don't get credit for what you did. I don't know how many years go by. Right, start again. It's very expensive here. If you have kids that you need to give driving lessons to, you need a separate bank account. I think you need 24 lessons minimum in order to get a driving license. Okay. He does it again. He takes the written test. He takes the eye exam. He takes the driving test. And then it comes time to make an appointment with the real test. Let's get the license. And again, time goes by. Yes, it's all over again. The person who keeps on taking what he has and can't complete it. He can't finish it. He always is going to go back to the beginning. And he can't just bring the makab of patish and take the final driving test and get the license. He can't. For whatever reason, he can't do it. There are people that can't take something to the next stage. They can't, because taking something to the next stage historically means you're changing something. That's not the way we always did it. And if you're going to do it this way, you're not b'kaivis. If you do it this way, you're kaifa. What we have to do is we always have to go back to the beginning and start again. And we'll see if with a new start, we can actually end it. What do you mean? We started already 25 times. Can we just try to finish it this time? No, we're going to start again. And there are people that learn like that. There are people that start a Masechta, they get to Daf Tes Vav, and then there's a break in time. They couldn't learn for 2 or 3 weeks. And the Yetzer Hara says, well, you're going to start from Tes Zayin. Start from Aleph again. Start from Beis again. They start from Beis again. They get to Chaf Gimel. And then a month goes by, they couldn't learn. They say, I don't remember anymore exactly what. Maybe I start the Masechta again. Right? It happens to all of us a lot of times. A year can go by. We say, I was at Chaf Gimel a year ago. No, I need to start again. It's a Yetzer Hara. Don't finish. You want to learn. But don't finish the Masechta. That's a siyum. Don't finish the Masechta. Keep on starting over and over again. Finish it already. So there are things that the Rebbeinu Shalom gives us the kaiches to do, and we can move on. It's not happy courses. It's not kfira. The Rebbeinu Shalom is telling you, I'm telling you, you can move on. Not change anything, but you can grow. An am novel v'loy chacham means you can learn, and you're like a fruit that fell off the tree before it's fully ripened. So what do you do when the fruit falls off the tree when it's not fully ripened? You throw in the garbage. And you wait a couple of months till the next fruit comes on the tree. And if you forget to pick that one too, that also falls on the ground, you throw it away. You wait for the next fruit, and that's like ate this. At some point, you have to give attention to the fact the fruit has to get ripened, and then I need to take it off the tree and use that ripened fruit. Am Navo V'lo Chacham means people are learning and learning and learning and learning and learning, and they never let the Torah ripen to its completion. Ripen to its completion means taking the Torah, Rav Kook is going to say, and letting it change you, change society, change the world. Let the Torah do something. If the Torah wasn't meant to do something, it would be up there in heaven with Moshe, up there in heaven with the Malachim. It could have stayed there. It came down here to do something. Give the Torah the opportunity to do something when the historical situation is such that the Rebbe Shalom is giving you opportunity. Otherwise, it's am chacham v'lo novel. The words, the churban by Yesheni bar kilglai de gedolei Torah. We'll take a look more at Blined next week. We're not criticizing gedolei Torah. I didn't say anything. I just read in Netziv. But there's something that Rav Kook's going to explain about getting stuck. Today, psychologists have the word "you're stuck." There's a point where people get stuck. They're scared to take the next step forward because the next step forward is a change, and a change means you're not b'kayvus. That's not a true equation. Everybody have a wonderful day, wonderful Shabbos. Thursday we'll have the Shiur at 12:15 in Parsha. We're going to address part of what we talked about today, and we'll talk a bit about Yom Yerushalayim.